Hey everybody, Cliff Ravenscraft here from podcastanswerman.com. And yeah, I have the worst voice you could possibly have going into a webinar. I apologize in advance. This is going to be a blast, I'm sure. But I hope that my investment of making this happen anyway will be worth it to you today. Today, I want to share with you the concept that I think is going to help you create a podcast that will last. And we'll get into why that is, why I actually teach this particular topic to every single person I've ever helped launch a podcast, and why it's the key essential ingredient to setting a solid foundation for your podcasting efforts. I do want to say real quickly, this is designed for people who are thinking about launching a podcast or who are desperately wanting to launch a podcast. And if that's you, I am so thrilled that you are participating in this free webinar. And I promise you this, if you are thinking about launching a podcast, if you are going to launch a podcast and you pay attention to what I'm about ready to share with you, by the end of the presentation that I'm going to share, you will have a solid foundation, at least a solid understanding of what it's going to take for you to succeed when most people fail. Some of you already have an existing podcast, and if you're here watching, I'm glad that you're here. This was targeted to people who are launching their podcast, but I know this. I've had people who have gone through my podcasting A to Z online training course in the past who already had an existing podcast. And this tutorial is it's the second assignment that I gave them when they came through podcasting A to Z. And when they went through this, a very high percentage of them actually made major shifts to their podcasting journey as a result of the material here. So without any further ado, let's go in and get right to business, because I know that's what you're here for. Let's learn. Oh, by the way, I just want to be really upfront with you. I am going to make an offer, a very special offer, probably one of the best offers I've made in a long time for those who are looking to launch a podcast. Many of you are aware that I did shut down podcasting A to Z this year after 32 sessions. I'll get into talking a little bit more about what podcasting A to Z was, what I offered when I did that. And for those of you who are disappointed that, well, you've been saving up, you've been wanting, it's been on your bucket list to take podcasting A to Z. You were ready to take podcasting A to Z in November or December, just waiting for me to launch that next one. And then you heard that I was shutting it down. Well, I'm going to have a special offer at the end of this webinar, but I promise you this, even if you have no desire to take me up on my offer, what I'm about ready to share with you is going to be valuable. So let's jump to it, shall we? So the topic today, how to build a podcast that will last. The first thing I want to share with you is an image, a little stock image I found a while ago. I purchased this. I love this. A little guy holding a heart. It says, I love podcasting. I actually put the I love podcasting on there. But anyway, this image is exactly how every brand new podcaster looks when they decide they want to start a podcast. And notice I say when they decide to start a podcast. This is how you can, the emotion that you can just tell, the joy in this person's heart, this is how they feel. However, once folks start getting into the nuts and bolts of creating their podcast, figuring out how to record and all this other stuff, setting up an RSS feed, putting their podcast episodes out week after week after week, and not necessarily, not really having a great feeling about it. This is how they end up feeling just a couple weeks down the road after launching their podcast. In fact, this is a statistic that has stood the test of time, unfortunately. And the statistic is that an overwhelming majority of podcasts never make it past their 7th episode. In fact, I just put this out in some of the marketing for this free webinar recently and says, oh my gosh, Cliff, okay, you got me. I made it to number 8, but I haven't actually done anything since then. And normally it really is episode number 7. I don't know what it is about the 7th episode, but most people who launch a podcast create 7 podcast episodes and never create another. Now, I happen to actually know the reason for this. And the reason I know is because, well, over the past 12 years, I've been creating content online and creating podcast content, done over 30 different shows, over 3,700 podcast episodes. And over the last 11 years, I've trained tens of thousands of people how to launch a podcast. And I will tell you that those that I have worked with one-on-one and the students who have gone through my group training program called Podcasting A to Z in the past, out of all of those students, an overwhelming majority, about 80% of them, go on to create a podcast that is either nearing their 100th episode or they are already in their hundreds of episodes. Some of my students in their thousands, okay? I don't recommend that for most people, but anyway, it can be done. So what's the difference? Well, let me ask you this. If you were thinking about building your own dream home, you've been saving up money for a very long time, you've been working to become debt-free, you've been building your wealth, working hard, comes time, you're ready to build your dream home. Something that you've had this vision in your mind. It's like, oh, I'm so excited about my dream home. The question I have for you is, could you imagine hiring somebody to go and have a conversation with you and then go build your home without first sitting down with you and creating a blueprint, without creating a design for what your new home is going to be, deciding what the purpose of your home is? What kind of goals do you have for your home? What do you want your home to achieve for you? Do you want to, for example, by the way, what you're seeing on this diagram here is actually the lower level of my home. You might call it a basement, walkout basement, but the highlighted yellow area there is where I'm sitting right now. I'm actually in the part that extends out to away from the rest of the house. That's my studio. And the rest of the yellow area there, which actually goes all the way back to the wall because we had them tear out a wall and push it back further. But that's a training facility. I said, hey, I want to build a huge studio where I can have podcast, audio studio. I could actually do video as well. And I actually want a training space so that I can actually bring people from all over the world, have them come sit in my studio, 12, 14, maybe even 16 people at a time, and I can teach live workshops. In fact, I'm going to be hosting another one of those workshops tomorrow and Saturday with this voice. It's going to be fun. But the answer to the question is no. You would never build your dream home without first sitting down and actually mapping out what you want it to look like. But that is exactly what most people do when they launch their podcast. They decide, hey, I want to launch a podcast. They get super pumped, super excited about what they've heard about podcasting, how it's the next big thing, how they're going to get noticed in this noisy world. And the first thing they do is go research, what equipment do I need for my podcast? How do I set up my podcast RSS feed? How do I get into a podcast directory? That's what their research is. Then they go and record some stuff, throw it online, and boom, they have a podcast. They record almost and up to 7 episodes, and a majority of those people never make it past their 7th episode because they never took time to design their dream podcast. And that's what we're going to do today. I believe each and every one of you who wants to launch a podcast, you can build a podcast that will last, that will have a lasting impact and influence, positive impact in the lives of people around the world if you will just ask yourself 8 foundational questions. All right? So let's see what those questions are. The first question, I know you're going to think this. It's going to be obvious. Why do you want to create your podcast? Now, I will tell you that in Podcasting A to Z, from March 2011 through, September 2017, I led 32 sessions of that course with as many as 20 to 35 students per session. And this assignment, every single time I ask them these foundational questions. And when I get to the first question, you'd be shocked at how many people says, wow, I haven't given that any thought. I really haven't thought about why I want to. I think it's cool. I think that well, I, I don't know. And people are like, hey, do you mind if I have a couple days to think about this? And I'm like, okay, sure. You have a couple days. Go ahead and let me know as soon as you're ready to talk about it. Now, what kind of responses am I typically looking for? Well, everybody's going to have their own reason why. And there is no right or wrong reason. So I'm going to tell you that. I'm not saying, hey, oh, okay, the reason that you're doing that's wrong. Maybe you want to do it because you want to become famous. Maybe you want to do it because you want to generate sales for your business. Maybe you want to do it because it's your ministry. You want to put your message out to the world. You want to do it because you're an author and you're writing a book and you're going to use it to give away free chapters of your book. Or maybe you've written a book that people have purchased and you want to give chapter by chapter ongoing additional ancillary information to the people who are in your tribe who purchased your book. There are all kinds of reasons why you might want a podcast, but I got to tell you, if you want to succeed with your podcast, I really do believe that you need to sit down and write out why do you want to create this podcast. Now, here is the purpose of the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. This is my own podcast. This is my business podcast. This is the why my podcast exists. All right. My mission is to pursue the life for which I was created and to inspire others to do the same. I will share experiences from my own journey in life, my successes, failures, fears, hopes, dreams, etc. I will share all of those experiences and what I'm learning from these experiences in an authentic and transparent way with the intent to provide education, encouragement, and inspiration that motivates others to take their own life to the next level. My friends, if you ever wondered why the Cliff Ravenscraft Show exists, this is the reason why. If you ever wondered why every single week there's a new episode of that podcast, even when I've got all kinds of other crazy things going on in my personal life and my professional life, the reason why there's still episodes there is because of what you see on the screen. I have a why for it. And the reason why this is so important to have this statement of why you are creating this content is because you're going to probably need to go back to it when you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Because if you ever heard anybody tell you that doing a podcast is easy, they lied to you. It is relatively simple, by the way, to do a podcast. But it's not easy. It's going to take a lot of work. There are some things you can do to shortcut the amount of work involved. But even if you eliminate all of the initial setup, you hire somebody else to do all that stuff for you, and all you do is record, and then you have somebody else who's doing all the editing and publishing and stuff like that, still, just the simple preparation of what am I going to say, then actually going in and setting aside the time to get yourself in the right mental state of mind, hitting the record button and producing that thing, and then just taking that recording and sending it off to somebody. Believe it or not, there are times when you're going to enjoy it and love it, but there are going to be times when you're doing it and you're going to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Especially when all kinds of other circumstances come up in your life that will cause you to want to miss a week and another week and another week and another week. And you're like, why am I doing this? If you answer this question, you'll have your answer, why. All right. Question number 2. What goals do you hope to achieve with your podcast? And I sincerely ask you to set aside some time before you buy any equipment, before you set up your website for your podcast, your RSS feed, to seriously ask yourself, what do I want this show to do for me? Here are some examples of my own goals. By the way, again, there are no wrong goals. It's just whether or not what are your goals so that you can measure and say, is my podcast doing for me or doing for others what I want it to do? So here are the specific 3 goals I have more, but these are the top 3 goals that I want to achieve with the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. Number 1, I want to receive unsolicited feedback on a consistent basis from people who tell me that my content is having a powerful and positive impact in their personal and professional lives. I don't want to actually beg them for it. Matter of fact, listen to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. Listen to the last 50, 100 episodes and see if you ever hear me ask you for an iTunes review. See if you ever hear me say, hey, what did you think about this? Email me, let me know. Absolutely not. I want to receive unsolicited feedback from people who are saying, gosh, I am so glad you do this show. This episode hit me just at the right time. I so needed this. All right? That's a very clear, specific goal. I want it to be on a consistent basis. I want it to be unsolicited. And whether or not that happens, I can tell. Do I go weeks or months without hearing anything? Well, then I know that I'm not, the show is not meeting that goal. The second priority, second goal that I desire for my podcast to become a must-listen-to show for a few key online influencers who can help me spread my message to folks that I may never reach on my own. Now, let me explain to you what that means. In fact, my show, by the way, is achieving this. I happen to know that my friend Dan Miller is on the call today. Dan, thank you so much for being here. I'm very honored that you're spending your afternoon with me here, and everyone else as well. But Dan Miller is somebody who has a massive online and physical following, people who love him, his books have inspired countless numbers of people, and he has a tremendous amount of influence in their lives. And I happen to know that Dan listens to my podcast on a regular basis. And the reason I know that, because guess what? I get unsolicited email feedback from Dan from time to time. And I love that. And the fact is because of the things that I'm sharing in my podcast, Dan is in his own podcast, in his own blog, and sometimes even speaking on the stage or at live events of his own, where he is actually telling people about me and the things that I've shared to his audience. Again, a key influencer. I could say the same is true about Michael Hyatt, Michael Hyatt has one of the top 10 business blogs in the world, and he listens to my show on a consistent basis. And I could name a couple other very influential people. And here's what I will tell you, because this is my number 2 goal. I will tell you that I would continue to create the Cliff Ravenscraft Show every single week if it were only for 3 to 5 listeners who downloaded my show every single week. Because I know who those 3 to 5 people are, and I know the impact that I'm able to have in the world indirectly through impacting and influencing them. And that is an incredible thing. So that's my second goal. My third goal for the Cliff Ravenscraft Show, I desire for my podcast to generate sales of my own products and or services, or the products and or services that I believe in that I also recommend. All right. And specifically, and by the way, not just the ones that I make commissions on, but certainly that is implied as well. Okay. So there are plenty of resources that I share that I believe in, that I recommend, that I actually do want to actually have my recommendation generate sales of those products and services, even if I don't get a commission, because I believe they will benefit the lives of people who listen. But if you want to know the intent of this third goal, the intent is that this is to generate income for myself and for my family and also for my friends. Okay, as long as we have things that are offering value to people, I want to actually be able to use my podcast to sell them. And it has my podcast, The Cliff Ravenscraft Show, does all 3 of those. If you were to ask me what my goal is as far as number of listeners, how many subscribers, I do not have a goal. If I had a top 10 list of all the goals associated with my podcast, in the top 10, there would be nothing related to how many subscribers I have. There would be nothing in my list of goals as to whether or not I'm in the top 10 of my category, the top 100 of my category, the top 200, or even the top 1,000 of my category. None of those things matter. Those two metrics are not important to me. I'm most important. If I achieve these three things, my podcast is golden. I'm going to continue to do it, and I have for years. All right. Question number 3. What is the niche focus or topic of your podcast? Now, if you look at some of the images that you see on the screen, these are podcast artwork for various different shows. You can actually look at the first one, the Golf Improvement Podcast. I would imagine that niche audience or the niche topic is golf. And the purpose of that show is probably to help people improve their golf game. The Construction Industry Podcast, the niche focus is the construction industry. Online Marketing Made Easy with my great friend and podcasting A to Z graduate, Amy Porterfield, which, by the way, the Golf Improvement Podcast, also A to Z graduate. Amy Porterfield has the Online Marketing Made Easy. It's very simple to see that her focus topic is online marketing. Assistive technology update. This is all about assistive technology, things like technology that help people that are hearing impaired, or any other physical or whatever impairment where there's technology that help assist people in achieving a better lifestyle, I think you understand what I'm saying. Anyway, Coaching Basketball Wisely. Focus basketball. More specifically focused on coaching basketball. I think you get the idea. The problem that I see is a lot of people out there want to create a podcast and they're afraid to niche down into a topic. One piece of advice that I have for you, pick a topic, but don't just go super broad. Now, I always make this analogy, and I should learn my lesson by now, but I've never actually taken the time to think of a better analogy. But if you were going to create a podcast about sports, okay, that's a niche topic, or that's a topic. It's sports. It's not politics. It's not culture. It's sports. Okay, I get it. Now, what if you were to take it and go a little bit more niche? Narrow it down just a little bit. And then what about, okay, instead of sports podcast, I'm going to do a football podcast. All right. Is that American football, or is that, basically soccer, or what the people in the UK or Europe would actually call real football? Obviously, let's just say, okay, it's American football. All right. I would say you could do American football. Now, I would encourage you to probably even niche down a little bit more than that. What about, are you going to do NFL, college, or high school football? Now, that right there, once you get into one of those, NFL football, college football, high school football, now that's where I think things really start getting excited when it comes to having a niche focus for your podcast. Now, if you want to have raving, loyal fans, instead of doing a college football podcast, then do a UK college football podcast, the Wildcat Report, which I don't know if that's the name of the podcast, but one of my friends and prior students actually launched a Wildcat football related podcast. It's massively successful, and practically everybody that is interested in UK football listens to that podcast. If you're going to do NFL, my friend Wayne Henderson does the Packers fan podcast. So you can go super niche if you want to. But anyway, I just want to encourage you to actually decide what is my topic of my show and how far can I convince you to niche it down even further so that every single episode is something that every person in your target audience would want to listen to. All right. By the way, the niche focus for the Cliff Ravenscraft: online business, personal and professional development, content creation. Okay. Those are the topics. Those are my niche focuses for my own podcast. All right. Question number 4. How would you describe your target audience? Let's see here. The target audience for the Cliff Ravenscraft show. I'm going to share with you. Number one, this is a person who has lived a lifetime as an employee, but who is now on the journey of 100% full-time self-employment, growing their own online business. That's my target audience. This person is interested in building a profitable online business around their personal brand as a coach, consultant, and or thought leader. Third thing to describe my target audience. This person would have the budget necessary and the desire to invest a minimum of $1,000 on products and services that would help them take their message, their business, and their life to the next level. Now, here's the thing. I just got off I'm going to come back to myself here for just a minute. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am going to take just a minute and drink some water, and I want to talk to you real quickly about this target audience thing. One more. That's a little bit better. Okay. Target audience. So I was just doing a mentoring call this morning at 11 a.m. And on my mentoring call, I have a client who has a full-time job that he actually loves. He's not actually looking to leave it, but he is definitely looking to build a business on the side that he can spend approximately 20 hours per week working on. A business that would allow him to operate in what we call our zone of genius. And if you haven't heard of that, I encourage you to get the book, The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. Anyway, he definitely wants to do something that in this job that allows him to operate doing what he feels that he is most put on this earth to do. And what he feels, he has had a ton of experience, has a ton of passion, and has a lot of expertise in coaching football. In fact, coaching youth football, and specifically kids aged 6 to 12. All right? It all started for him when his own kids had football teams, and he actually became their coach. And he absolutely is in love with having such a profound impact in shaping the lives of these young kids aged 6 to 12 through youth football coaching. His business, by the way, and by the way, just so you know, he came to me and says, Cliff, I've already had a number of other football coaches from other youth teams that said, oh my gosh, how did you do this? I've already had, when I said, okay, how many people? And he gave me like a whole list of people who have come and asked him for that. And I said, hey, tell me what else? Where else are people coming to you already asking you for advice on this? He goes, well, I've already spoken at 2 conferences with hundreds of other coaches. And I'm like, awesome, that's a good sign. And he says, and I'm also, there's the biggest not trade show, but the biggest, he didn't call it a conference, he called it something else. But there's this big event that is the biggest event for coaches in the United States. And it's going to be this massive thing. And he's been invited to do a keynote speech for them. So we were talking, and I was like, his desire is to take his experience of what he's been able to do through his own personal coaching. He wants to continue to do some of that, but he also has a heart for coaching these coaches on the techniques he's used to have a massive, profound impact in people's lives. And so when we were talking earlier today about this idea of niching down, and by the way, the more narrowed down, niched down, targeted you get, I believe the more clients you will have, the more listeners you will have. And it doesn't make sense. So when I asked him, I didn't go into all the details at first. I just said, so tell me, who do you think your target audience is for your business? We had already discussed what kind of products and services, he'd be willing to create. I said, now tell me who you're going to create these for. And so his first answer is youth coaches. All right. It's like, okay, wow, that's broad, but youth coaches is a great place to start. Let's see if we can narrow that down. And so, youth coaches could be the female coach or it could be the coach of the female high school volleyball team. Is that your target audience? Well, I'm sure they could be helped by this. And he went on. I said, do you see how youth coaches could be everything? Now the question is I can't share with you too many personal details about this person, but I went and told him about a friend of mine named Gary Tackix. All right. And I sit there, I said, now this person happens to work in a profession that has a practice. Okay. And I said, what if I told you you could hire, and let me see if I can pull this up. I think this will be worth it if you guys will allow me to take a moment and to pull this up here, because I think this will be valuable to share with you. And I'm just making this part up on the fly. So bear with me just one moment because I want to find Gary Tackix thing here. All right. So this would have been nice to think of ahead of time, Cliff. Just saying. Gary Tackix. Let's pull this up. Where's that play button? It's not got a play button. That's fine. Okay, so let's go back over to the screen and let's just pull this up here. And hopefully I can make it to where you can see it. Bring that down a little bit. Check this out. All right. So I sit there, I said, so he is involved in a profession that has a practice. And I said, what if I told you that you could hire this guy named Gary who would be your coach, who can help you develop your ideal practice that provides you with the economic success that you desire. Imagine the joy of practicing what you do because you want to, not because you have to. And he says, Cliff, that sounds so appealing. I love that. I said, so you'd love to work with this guy, right? Absolutely. And so I sat there, I said, well, let me read the rest of this to you. And by the way, this person, this client, this mentoring client of mine, he is not a dentist. So I read this thing about the bio for Gary Tackix. Gary Tackix is one of the most recognized dental practice management consultants in dentistry today. His knowledge of the business of dentistry has helped thousands of dentists develop a thriving practice in any economy. With Gary as your coach, you can develop your ideal practice that provides you with the economic success that you deserve. Imagine the joy of practicing dentistry because you want to, not because you have to. Now, here's the thing. Gary Tackix was not afraid to niche down. And okay, by the way, Gary Tackix is a graduate of podcasting A to Z. He actually just published his 302nd episode. He's been podcasting for years. And since I worked with Gary, I have come across and met face-to-face more than 50 dentists, and I'm talking around the world. I met dentists when I was in New Zealand for 10 days. I met dentists when I was in Manchester in the UK. I met dentists when I was in Amsterdam. I met a dentist when I was in Paris. I'm trying to think of that place, France. I've met dentists all over the United States at conferences. It's not like I'm going to dental conferences. I just run into people and I say, what do you do? And they say, I'm a dentist. And do you know what? Every single time I've met more than 50 dentists, I ask them one question. I said, have you ever heard of a guy named Gary Tackix? Every single one of them. This is not an exaggeration. I love his podcast. He is amazing. This guy is a genius. I listen to the Thriving Dentist Show. I go to all of his continuing education courses. He has and by the way, Gary Tackix has the most amazing continuing ed courses where you can actually go race Indy 500 cars and then do your required training that night. They do, cross-country motorcycle rides. It's crazy the stuff that Gary Tackix does. But here's the thing. Gary Tackix, there's hardly a dentist in the world that doesn't know his name because he wasn't afraid to narrow down and niche down. All right? Now, by the way, remember my target audience is people who are sick and tired of the day job. They want to transition out of an unfulfilling day job so that they can actually create their own full-time self-employment, become 100% full-time self-employed. That's my target audience. And I asked my client this morning, I said, does that description fit you? He says, well, no, not necessarily. I have no desire to quit my day job. I make he makes a lot of money, and we even talked. I said, what if this could actually what if this could eclipse the money that you make there? He goes, even then, I would still want to work maybe 40 hours here and do this on 20 minutes on the side. So I said, you don't technically fit my target audience, right? He says, yep. I said, did that keep you from paying me $3,500 for my mentoring calls? He said, nope. I said, do you see how choosing a narrow niche target audience, becoming known in that space, does not actually keep you from being valuable to all the other people who might benefit from your stuff and might even purchase your products and services? And within an hour, he became convinced that he will no longer have a target audience of youth coaches, but his target audience will be youth coaches or youth football coaches who coach children that are between the ages of 6 and 12. That now is his target audience. And he said, I was super concerned at first when I suggested that. And then by the end of our conversation, he's like, it's obvious. That's what I need to do. This, my friends, is what I believe you need to do as well. You need to really narrow down that target audience. All right, so we've covered this real quick, so we're going to move on to question number 5. How often will you publish a new episode? Now, if you want some more of my thoughts on this, I will share with you that you could go to episode 308 of my podcast at podcastanswerman.com/308. And it was titled 3 Reasons I Considered Going to Multiple Episodes Per Week and 3 Reasons I Chose Not to Do So. All right, so what's the deal here? Let me explain to you. First and foremost, you can choose to produce content as frequently or infrequently as you want. If you want to create a podcast and publish 3 podcast episodes per day, 7 days a week, you are free to do so. In fact, there are people who actually do multiple podcast episodes per day. I don't know why, but they do it. Then there are people who do 1 episode a day every day. Plenty of those people out there. They're the most frequent choice for frequency of released content is weekly. It's the one that I personally recommend, and I'll explain why in just a moment. I believe the second best option would be twice a month. Not every other week, but twice a month. And if you're going to do twice a month, I would do the 1st and 15th of the month. That way they always know when that episode's coming out. The third best option, I would say, is monthly, once a month. And it's even better if your audience knows exactly what day of the month that's going to drop. And I think the fourth best option is daily. Those are my own observations based upon what I experience as a podcast consumer myself and my experience of working with tens of thousands of other people who consume podcast content and also create it. Okay. So why weekly? First of all, anybody who really gets into podcasting, it's very rare that you're going to find somebody who, unless they just discovered podcasting, if somebody is into podcasting, you're going to look at their podcast app and you're going to see that they're subscribed to multiple different shows. And the exciting thing about podcasting is most people would love to listen, to make sure that once they've found a show that they love, they want to hear every episode of that particular show without getting behind. Now, I will tell you, I did not have this planned ahead of time, but I'm gonna. This sometimes could bite me in the. Well, it can backfire, but we're gonna try this. So I'm gonna go over to Twitter real quick, and I'm gonna see if anybody's saying this right now. I believe that when you do too much content, you overfeed your audience. You run the damage of causing stress in people's lives. So I'm gonna do a search. Actually, I need to go up here to search. I'm gonna do a search for this exact phrase. So let's see here. I'm going to put in the quote mark, so behind on podcasts. All right, see if we get any. Here we go. Stormy on October 3rd says, I've been so behind on podcasts. And this is the gift that she chose to describe how she feels about that. Matt Martin on October 4th says, no worries. Wasn't sure if they sponsor the show. I'm so behind on podcasts. Months of current geek and cord killers to catch up on. Okay. Lego List, November 1st. I'm so behind on podcasts. How did I let this happen? Keona, October 12th. I'm so behind on podcasts, but it's because I can't stop listening to this audiobook. All right. Here's one. So let's see here. So it's International Podcast Day, and I'm so behind on podcasts listening, but need new ones to listen to as well. Suggestions, please. So she's probably never going to catch up on those. Anyway, I think you get the idea. And this stuff is happening all the time, all around the world. I believe that if you were to just allow yourself to produce one podcast episode per week, you would allow yourself to fit into the regular weekly routine of people's life. I can tell you that every Monday morning, I look forward to having Ray Edwards and his son Sean, his co-host, join me for breakfast. Every Friday morning, I look forward to Dan Miller joining me for breakfast. I mean, these guys are part of my week. And if they ever miss an episode, things feel like there's something missing. You become a regular part of people's lives. I've never heard, and I've talked to thousands of people about this. There are people I know that subscribe to shows that are on a daily basis. I've not met one who has told me that they listen to every single episode. No such person has ever existed that has told me that. So the question is if you would love to have a podcast where the content that you produce, you become so much a part of people's lives that they desperately want to hear every syllable of every word that you ever produce in your podcast, don't overfeed them. I recommend that you consider a weekly podcast episode. All right. Let's see here. Back over to my thing. Oh, by the way, okay, I just want to share with you this weekly thing. I'm going to come back. So I told you 3 reasons. I came back from this event and I'm like, hey, I've been doing podcast episodes where I talk about multiple different topics, and my shows are an hour in length. And I thought, you know what? Instead of doing multiple episodes or multiple topics per episode, I know I could improve my ranking. And I could also make it easier for people to find exactly the answers they're looking for if I did one topic per show, and I did the show and limited to each topic to 20 minutes. And so I proposed to my audience, hey guys, what do you think about this? If I do, instead of every Friday giving you a 1-hour show where I talk about approximately 3 topics, what about if I give you an episode every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday that were each 20 minutes? And when I asked my audience that, an overwhelming majority said I would unsubscribe. And I said, wait a second, tell me this. Why is that? Because 20 minutes times 3 episodes is 1 hour. Why don't you just let Monday, Wednesday, and Friday build it, and on Friday listen to all 3 of them? Wouldn't that be exactly the same? And they said, no, it wouldn't. And psychologically, they're not the same. And I would tell you right now, if any of my weekly content producers that I absolutely love, that have become a positive influence in my life, even Dan Miller, if you went to 3 episodes a week, I don't know that I would unsubscribe, but I know I would not listen to every episode. Even if you were to actually have 3 shorter episodes that overall total length would be less than the 1 episode per week that you've been doing, I don't know that I'd listen to every episode. It's something up here, but I know it to be true, and it's not just me. It's thousands of other people who have confirmed it. 1 episode per week, and actually, little secret, the amount of time doesn't matter. It could be 10 minutes per episode once a week. It could be 2.5 hours. I don't recommend that you go over an hour unless you have a loyal community that just absolutely wants to hear everything you could ever come up with saying. Between 20 to 40 minutes is the best on a weekly basis. Let's move forward. All right, back to here. Question number 6. What is the format of your show? Will you do a solo hosted show? These are my favorite shows, both for the ones that I love to listen to and mostly the ones that I love to create. However, you could also do a co-hosted show. Now, I've done plenty of these over the years, and in fact, my wife and I do a show called Family from the Heart, We are on episode 405, and we've been doing this show since January 2008, and I absolutely love podcasting with my wife as a co-host. Will your show feature a panel discussion? I subscribe to 2 of these, This Week in Tech with Leo Laporte and Friends, and Mac Break Weekly with Leo Laporte and Friends. By the way, both of those shows are 2 to 2.5 hours in length. I listen to every single episode that they produce. I've not missed an episode of either of those podcasts since they started creating them back in 2005 and 2006. So 5 hours a week that I consume of their content. Okay, I don't listen to all 5 hours. I do skip all their commercials, which are about 27 minutes. But all the other conversation, it's brilliant stuff. It's how I stay up on technology. So you could do a panel discussion. Will you do interviews? You could do face-to-face interviews. You could go out into the field and interview people at conferences. You could invite people to your office or your recording studio and do interviews face-to-face. You could do interviews via Skype or online with people anywhere in the world. I've done tons of those. You can do that as well. Another thing about your format, you need to decide ahead of time. Or no, you want to think about, you want to answer these questions. Starting out, will my show have an intro, a professional jingle? Something that will allow me to take a drink real quick is to give you an example of a jingle. And I'm going to pull this up here on my iPad. And so here's a jingle example.
Welcome to another episode of The Family from the Heart, a podcast that is devoted to giving you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of the Ravenscraft family, a family that has given up on the ordinary to pursue the lives for which they were created. Now, here are your hosts, Cliff and Stephanie.
All right, so there you go. Just barely long enough for me to actually take a drink of water and blow my nose at the same time. Not that you needed to know that, but oh my goodness, so sorry. All right, just being authentic and transparent. That's who I am to the core, and I apologize. Let's move right on. Oh, and by the way, will you have segments? It's possible to have segments for your show. Having segments for your show. My wife and I used to do a podcast. We got started years ago doing a show about the TV show Lost, and we did a thing called listener feedback, and we would say, hey, it's now time to take some listener feedback.
Yes.
Colonel Locke, is this line secure?
Line secure, go ahead.
Hey, Cliff, Stephanie, Tori.
This is Michelle from Texas. This is Kim from Indiana.
Josh from California.
Jennifer from Florida.
Sam in Tucson.
Kimberly from California.
Paul in Memphis, Tennessee.
Listener feedback. Target area is acquired. We are a go.
Roger that.
All right, so you could break up your show into segments. My friend Ray Edwards does this with his podcast. He has a spiritual foundation segment. He has a tip of the week segment, and then he has his main feature presentation. My friend Chris Pavone does segments for his show. He does quote of the week. He does Happy Wife, Happy Life, and his main, feature presentation. My friend Father Roderick Von Hogan, I've listened to I think close to about 1,500 of his podcast episodes of various different shows that he's done. And he breaks his show into segments. Do I recommend it? It doesn't matter. It's up to you. The questions you should be asking is, what do you want your format to look like? And then, of course, what length will your podcast episodes be? There are no right or wrong answers here. And the one thing I want to give you as a hint, don't box yourself into a format. Whatever you do, when you launch your first episode, don't in that episode tell your audience what your format will be. Do not. Even if you said, hey, here's what I'm getting ready to launch my podcast. I'm thinking, this could be dangerous, by the way. I don't know if I have any tissue residue. I think I'm good. Okay. I'm sorry. But anyway, where are we at on time? We're good. So now I've lost my train of thought. What was I saying? Let's see here. We're right here. We were talking about boxing yourself in. So whatever you do, if you decide I'm getting ready to launch a podcast, I've never produced a podcast episode before, but my favorite podcasts are interviews. These ones where they have a different interview every single week. Obviously, that's what I'm going to do. That's fine. Make that decision. Go for it. See how you like it. But whatever you do, when you introduce, hey, everybody, welcome to my new podcast where every week I'm going to feature an interview with so-and-so or with this type of person. That's a bad thing to say because guess what? There's a chance you may actually get into it and find out that, number one, finding great guests 52 weeks out of the year is a little bit more difficult than you anticipated. You may find that some people, wow, I don't know how I can even get these people to talk. So tell me about your greatest vacation. Oh, it was when we went to San Juan. That's it? That's all you're giving me? Can you elaborate? And some of them can't, or they choose not to. So I will tell you, don't promise whatever your format is. Just choose that. Keep it to yourself, but just produce your content. Put it out there and don't box yourself in. Change it. Try different things. Many people do interview-based podcasts because they are afraid. They have a lot of self-doubt, a lack of confidence in their ability to bring value in a solo-hosted show, and they're nervous about it. I encourage you, step out of your comfort zone and just try it. Publish an episode out there solo every now and then. Even if you decide I'm going to do an interview-based podcast episode or podcast, do 3 interviews, three interviews for 3 weekly interviews, and then episode 4, throw in a solo hosted show. See how you like it. Go back and forth. Try it. Bring in a co-host for 1 episode. You can do anything you want. Do not feel like you have to be boxed into what you chose when you started your show. If you feel boxed in, you might actually stop producing your content. All right, moving on. Question number 7. What is the name of your podcast? Your podcast can really be named anything you want. You got Converge. What does Converge mean anyway? I mean, as far as a podcast, what's the niche focus? Who's the target audience? Well, it does have the business of creativity. So now I happen to know Converge. It's actually a Podcasting A to Z alumni. And I happen to know that it's a show for creatives. Specifically, this person was, I think he's a copywriter or a photographer. Or he may have background in both, but anyway, he's a creative, and he wanted to create a show for the business of creativity. The Golf Improvement Podcast, Robin's Top 5. Robin's Top 5 what? And by the way, who's Robin? So Robin's Top 5. But here's the deal. I personally, this is what I believe here. I believe your show can be titled anything you want, as long as you own it and are willing to accept it, own it, and promote it. Okay? You need to accept it, own it, and promote it. So my friend Andrew Warner, he has a podcast called Mixergy. What the heck is Mixergy? Mixergy, by the way, is a podcast where he interviews people who are startups who have grown a business to be extremely financially profitable. All right. But when I first heard the term Mixergy, I thought it was a podcast for bartenders, and I guess I thought the word was actually mixology, but no, it's Mixergy. And I still don't know. And actually, I heard him do an interview with another friend of mine recently, and he said what Mixergy was. And it's a combination of 2 different words, but anyway, it doesn't matter. His show is extremely profitable, successful, and also the business around his podcast is extremely profitable, in spite of the fact that his show is named something that nobody has a clue what it is until it's explained to them. Now, with that being said, little piece of advice from me to you. I recommend that your show have some kind of indication as to what the content may be. Now, with that being said as well, I will tell you that I don't always follow those rules. I do most of the time. Family from the Heart is a look at family life and the family issues from the heart of 2 people, Cliff and Stephanie Ravenscraft. That's what Family from the Heart is. I have a podcast that I did called the Virtual Assistant Podcast. I'll give you 2 guesses. The first one doesn't count as to what the topic of that podcast is. I did a podcast called Business Tech Weekly, where every week we talked about technology you could use in your business. I did a podcast called Social Media Serenity. And it's all about how you can use social media but not lose your life in it. All right. I did a show called Help, I Got a Mac at helpigotamac.com. Guess what that show was about? It was for people who are Apple Mac enthusiasts who love that kind of the Apple technology, but need help understanding the changing things and how to accomplish and do things with that technology. Help, I Got a Mac. All right. So I've been all over the Hunger Games fan podcast, the Twilight Saga podcast. There's no question what those shows were. By the way, all of those shows were my shows that I've done, many of them with my wife, many of them with some of my friends as co-hosts. But I used to have a show called Podcast Answer Man. Guess what that show was about? Answering your questions about podcasting. After 380 some odd episodes, I decided I don't want to limit myself and this audience to people who are looking for technical answers related to podcasting, and I rebranded it to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show. Well, who's Cliff Ravenscraft? Well, thankfully, I've built a name for myself. A lot of people know, and I've got a lot of synergy behind that. Actually, synergy might have been one of the half of the words of mixergy. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But anyway, you get the idea. So the name of your show doesn't matter. I do think that having a name in your show like Virtual Assistant Podcast or the Twilight Saga Podcast or Online Marketing Made Easy. By the way, I like titles of podcasts without the word podcast in them more. I used to do a lot of shows with something/podcast. I love the term podcast, by the way, but I like Online Marketing Made Easy, Smart Passive Income, those kind of shows. Anyway, those are my thoughts on naming your show. If you want more thoughts from me and on this topic specifically, then episode 335 at podcastanswerman.com/335. All right, question number 8, the final question. What is the one paragraph description of your podcast? And by the way, the purpose of your one paragraph description is to cause people to hit the subscribe button. And it's going to work even better if you know exactly who your target audience is. For the Virtual Assistant Podcast, guess who that target audience is? If you guess that it's for people who are looking to build their own online business, becoming full-time self-employed, you may be right. So that's my target audience. What is the topic of my show? Virtual assistants. Here's my description of my podcast. Imagine you have lived the lifetime of an employee. You're now owning and operating your own business. You're full-time self-employed. You're a team of one doing everything. And you need to learn how to delegate, but you don't know how to do it. And then you come across people saying, you got to look up information. You need to hire a virtual assistant. And people are like, what's a virtual assistant? And then they start saying, okay, I wonder if there's a podcast on it. And they do a search and they find the Virtual Assistant Podcast. And they read this description. You've probably heard many people talk about the thought of hiring a virtual assistant, aka a VA. I had heard about them for years, and I only just hired my first VA this year. I am a firm believer in the benefits of using a virtual assistant. I wish a podcast like this existed 2 years ago when I left my career in insurance to start my own business. Do you see how I put my target audience in there? I'm doing pretty well today. Though knowing what I know now, if I can only imagine how much I could have accomplished had I known more about virtual assistants a few years ago. Do you have questions? This podcast is devoted to getting you the answers you're looking for. That, my friends, that's the kind of one paragraph podcast description you need to be creating, where your target audience says, whoa, that's me. I need this podcast. There are people who subscribe to the show without even listening to see if the audio is any good. That's a whole nother topic for another time we're not going to get into today. Real quickly, we need to wrap this thing up here. So those 8 foundational questions that you should be asking yourself before you buy a piece of equipment, before you set up your website, before you launch an RSS feed, before you hire somebody to go do your artwork. Here are the 8 questions. Why do you want to create your podcast? What's the purpose? What goals do you hope to achieve with your podcast? What is the niche focus or topic for your show? How would you describe your target audience? How often will you publish a new episode? I recommend weekly. What's the format of your show? I recommend playing around with it. What is the name of your podcast? And what is the one paragraph description of your podcast that is going to cause people to hit the subscribe button? Now, that is the content that I wanted to share with you. I believe if you answer those 5 questions, you will have a foundation for greater success. You will be more likely to make it past that deadly 7th episode that trips people up. Now, I have a real quick special offer for you. Many of you guys know I have trained tens of thousands of people around the world how to podcast over the last 11 years. And from March 2011 through September 2017, I did 32 sessions of a course called Podcasting A to Z. It was $2,000. I had up to 20. Sometimes I went as much as 35 students in a session. And what I did for those people is I gave them unlimited access to me as their personal coach in a discussion forum. I gave them an entire list of tutorials that walked them through every single step in the process of launching a podcast, which, by the way, the tutorials alone, without any access to me, would have walked them through it. They didn't need the access to me. But if they had any questions, which a lot of people need some hand-holding, they would have the ability to ask me any questions. And Monday through Friday for 4 weeks, I made myself available, and I promised to answer every single question for them. And this was Podcasting A to Z. And I guess almost 700 students had gone through this course, generating almost $1 million in revenue for me and my business, successfully helping people put their message into the world. Podcasts that have gone on to create, most of those people are nearing their 100th episode. Many of them are in their 200s, their 300s, and I have some clients who are in their thousands of episodes. The thing is, though, I do not offer Podcasting A to Z. I am now in a different phase. I am now considering myself to be an online business mentor. And so I help people who are, looking to make the transition from full-time self-employment into becoming 100% full-time employed. People who've created a podcast and say, I wonder how I can monetize this and build a business around it so I can leave my soul-sucking career like you did. That's what I do these days. But when I announced that I was shutting down Podcasting A to Z, so many people were disappointed. They emailed me. I mean, lots of people emailed me and said, Cliff, oh my gosh, I'd been saving. I was almost ready to click the buy now button, and I was going to sign up in December. I was going to sign up in January, but now you're not doing it anymore. What do you recommend? Well, I have a very special offer that I want to tell you about. The picture or the slide here, the person on my right, his name is Jody Smith. Jody Smith is a graduate of Podcasting A to Z. He actually took my course many years ago. I should have looked up when he took the course, but he took my course many years ago. And when he took the course, he already understood a lot about podcasting. He just wanted to bone up his skills a little bit more. And one of the things that I found is that when he was in his session of Podcasting A to Z, I had more than 20 students at the time. And this guy was in there lending a hand, helping people, jumping on Skype with them one-on-one. He was one of the most generous, giving people I'd ever seen. And every person who said that they connected with him was in love with him. So much so that in future sessions, there were times when I had almost 40 people in a session of Podcasting A to Z, and I hired Jody on a contract basis to help me answer technical questions. This guy is a rock star. Over the years, there have been people who say, Cliff, I can't wait till your next Podcasting A to Z course. I desperately need to launch my podcast. Is there somebody you can refer me to? There's been one person I've referred people to time and time again, and that, my friends, has been my friend Jody Smith. And here's a couple testimonials. And by the way, I literally sent this email 2 nights ago. All right. So this is Thursday. So Tuesday night, I said, hey, guys, if I've ever referred Jody Smith to you, would you do me a favor and send me a testimonial and a headshot? And I got all of these within less than 48 hours. So here's what Rieger Cortell said, Jody is the best. He saved me more times than I can count when I was a newbie podcaster 4 years ago. Even to this day, if I were to have an issue or a problem, fingers crossed I don't, he would be my first choice. He is smart, knowledgeable, and kind. He is quick to respond to problems, often before I had the chance to pull out a single hair on my head. And as an added bonus, he has my kind of quirky sense of humor and always knew exactly when to use it to help me laugh over something rather than scream. You will be glad you opted to work with Jody, and in the near future, you too will be writing this kind of review for him too. All right, I promise, she says. Gary Tackix, do you remember that guy? Talked to him a lot. He's an A to Z graduate. He wanted somebody to help him with the production of his show. He says, listen, I love the show, what it's doing for my business, but I'd love to have somebody help me. So listen to what Gary says. And by the way, he's been working with him for years. Gary says, I have worked with Jody as a podcast resource for a number of years now, and he has been absolutely outstanding, ! Jody has a deep background on the technical aspects of podcasting, and his knowledge and expertise allow me to produce a podcast with the very highest production quality. Cliff Ravenscraft taught me the importance of producing high-quality audio, and Jody helps me achieve Cliff's standard. Jody, as a part of my podcasting team, with Jody as a part of my podcasting team, I am able to focus on producing the content for my podcast, and Jody takes care of all the support details. If you are considering launching a podcast, let me be a voice of encouragement. Launching a podcast was a brilliant business decision. My show allows me to reach an audience that I simply could not reach with any other medium. Cliff and Jody are two amazing resources that will help you successfully launch your podcast. Christina Cantors. She is also an A to Z graduate who has used Jody to help from time to time. Jody is my go-to guy when it comes to the technical side of podcasting. When you're not technical like me, it can be extremely frustrating when your RSS feed or uploads just don't seem to work. I've turned to Jody numerous times for help, and he's always supported me and resolved the issues quickly. Plus, he's very warm and generous, a very warm and generous human being. I can highly recommend working with him. Kent Julian, great friend of mine, says, I originally hired Jody Smith to help me set up my podcast equipment. I expected him to help me with the technical stuff, but he also brought much more value because he walked me through the entire launch process. What's more, Jody showed genuine interest in my podcast by asking me questions that I did not expect, questions that made me think through my podcast goals and expectations at a much deeper level. Since then, I have retained Jody as my podcast coach. That was 83 weekly episodes ago. We just published episode 84. I highly recommend him if you want one-on-one coaching for your podcast launch. Ijama Eliazu says, Jody is a podcast technical whiz and so responsive whenever I need help. I trust him and his work completely, so much so that I feel comfortable enough to give him my passwords to all of my accounts, allowing him to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. He's really good about knowing when to create a brief video tutorial to explain how to do something, and also when an in-person call is more appropriate. Best of all, when he knows something might be more technical than I can handle myself, he has never hesitated to offer to jump in and take care of it himself. If he doesn't already have the answer, he is always upfront about that and will do whatever it takes to find the answer to any technical dilemmas I've had. John Murphy says, I've been working consistently with Jody over the last number of years. He is brilliant and is so great to work with. Jody supports me with all the technical aspects of my podcasting that I'd rather not do. He does all my editing, trimming, uploading to iTunes, etc. Jody is also my go-to man when I'm having any technical problems. Like a genie from the lamp, he turns up just when I need him. He's an integral part of my podcasting journey, and I absolutely recommend him to anybody launching a podcast. Now, real quickly, you can see there is a URL up on the screen here. I'm gonna bring that URL up again in just a second, but I just want to personally talk to each and every one of you for just a moment and tell you about this special offer that I'm doing with my friend Jody. And guys, if you know me, you know that I don't partner with anyone that doesn't have not just my standard of excellence, my standard of customer care, the standards of serving others, loving others, doing it for the right reasons, all of those things. But also, I would not refer you to somebody that did not have, that I was not fully convinced has every bit of skill necessary that is equal to, and in some cases, even beyond my own technical skills related to podcasting. And yes, there are people out there like that. Jody, in some areas, has greater skill than I do. All right. There are things that Jody could help you with in a podcast that I don't. And the reason why, because Jody has not just helped people launch podcasts, but he's helped people who already have podcasts do things like rebrand and change RSS feeds and stuff like that. I've made it my business over the last 11 years. I only train people how to launch podcasts. I do not offer support beyond that. My people have loved what I've done. 100% satisfaction rating from every person I've ever worked with or had as a student. But Jody has helped people even beyond the launch of their podcast. And so there are things that he knows how to do that I don't. So let me tell you about the special offer for those of you who want to launch a podcast. If you've been thinking about podcasting A to Z and you were disappointed that you could not work with me, this is the offer I want to make to you. Jody and I together teaming up to help you successfully launch your podcast. But here's what you're going to get. I'm going to be doing my zone of genius, the thing that I love most. I'm going to, by the way, I'm just going to tell you right up front, the price is $2,400. Okay, now that's $400 more than podcasting A to Z, but you're getting something so much more than podcasting A to Z. Okay, so here's what you're getting for the $2,400. You're getting a 1-hour mentoring call with me. So before you work with Jody for the first time, you and I video face-to-face via either Skype or Zoom call or something like that. One-on-one, you and I are going to talk, and I'm going to do a mentoring session with you, and we're going to go over your answers to the 8 questions or talk. I will answer any questions during that hour to help mentor you, get you in the right place, to set you on a solid foundation for success with the right expectations of what your podcast can do for you and how it will fit into achieving the goals that you want for it. So a one-on-one, 1-hour mentoring call with me. But then after you've had that call with me, Jody personally, one-on-one, will mentor you for 4 weeks. Now, he will walk you through 4 calls that will be, each call will be between 1 to 2 hours. And I do know this about Jody. He will spend as much time with you as necessary. In week 1, he's going to help you with your figuring out exactly what podcast equipment you need. And he will give you links to where you can buy it. No matter what your budget is, if you only have $100 to spend on equipment, he can help you figure that out and get you a great sounding show for $100. If you want to spend, as much as $1,600 on the package that I sell, he could tell you about that, or he could tell you anything in between. So during the first call, he's going to help you with that. He's going to help you find out how to get the best audio branding for your show if you want that, where some resources are for artwork for your show. He's going to help you develop all that stuff in the first week's call that you do with him. He's going to give you some assignments to go order that equipment. In the second week, the second call that you do, once you have your equipment, he's going to literally be on the phone with you, literally walking you through step by step. This is even better than podcasting A to Z. With podcasting A to Z, you had to watch my tutorials, try it on your own, and then send a discussion forum and ask me a question. And guess, every single person who had issues hooking up their equipment, I was able to solve 100% of them. But in full transparency, those people did have to wait sometimes a couple hours before I would actually respond to them. That's just the nature of how group coaching works. With Jody, you're getting it done on the call right then, right there. Jody's going to walk you through every single bit of it, making sure it all works, teaching you how to use it to record your show, how to use it to record your online interviews, all of that stuff. He will be there to support you. Now, in podcasting A to Z, when it finally came time, you've recorded your episode, you got all this stuff going, and it's ready to launch your show, put it online, put it on your website and stuff like that. In my course, you watch tutorials. And if you ran into problems, you actually asked me questions and I got you through every single one of them. However, you work with Jody. Jody gets you on the call and he says, okay, I need you here to help me with passwords to some of your accounts. I need you here so that I can have you put in your credit card and stuff like that. But Jody literally will actually do the website configuration for you. He will do the podcast RSS feed configuration for you. He will do it all for you, except for the recording and preparing of your show and stuff like that. But he is going to be there. And in addition to that, he will be there. He will support you during the 4 weeks of your launch. So this is a better offer than podcasting A to Z. And if you want to take him up on this, you go to podcastanswerman.com/Jody. This is limited to no more than 10 people, and I believe it's only available through November 15th because of my schedule of how many people it's really my schedule that's limiting this to 10 people. So it basically, if you want to get in before November 15th, sign up today, and Jody and I definitely want to help you successfully launch your podcast, a podcast that is going to last. Again, that's podcastanswerman.com/Jody. podcastanswerman.com/Jody. Now, with that being said, I'm looking real quickly here. There are 45 people still on the call. That is really everything that I needed to share with you. But if you still have questions and you would like to have Jody and myself answer some questions, I'm going to bring Jody on. But first, I'm going to stop this recording. This is the end of the video replay, and the Q&A will only be for those who still wanted to be here. But for those of you watching this replay, real quickly, podcastanswerman.com/Jody, and there's a lot of people that were on the live stream. So if you're watching the replay, get in there as quickly as possible. Again, podcastanswerman.com/Jody. All right, where's my little thing? I lost my thing. I wanted, where did it go? There we go. podcastanswerman.com/Jody.